Useless perks is an issue that's been plaguing Dead by Daylight since the very day it was released. Even now that BHVR has nearly 8 years of development experience, once in the blue moon they still give us perks that are, well, this for example. However, what's considered useless by today's standards is infinitely better than what people called useless in the game's early days. In fact, until 2018, there was a perk that legitimately didn't do anything. I'm talking about Deja Vu. Having been around since the launch of the game, Deja Vu is among the oldest survivor perks. Just like today, its original version provided aura reading on gens, but it was a different type of aura reading. Today it shows you whichever 3 gens are the closest to each other at the moment, which makes it a direct counter to the 3-gen strat. Since this strat became prominent only by 2018, initially there was no need for such an effect. So instead, Deja Vu helped oblivious players find their way on the map and start working on the objective before half of their team was on the death hook. For this, at the start of the match, it showed 2 random gens for 8 seconds. And that was the first problem with this perk. 2 gens for 8 seconds is a huge steaming pile of nothing, especially considering that after these 8 seconds, the perk deactivated until the end of the match, leaving you with just 3 perks. Why would anyone ever choose this over the 8-second self-care, sprint burst rolling back while running, or pretty much any other absolutely busted meta perks of that era? Well, I'll tell you who. Complete noobs with map awareness so bad that if you wanted them to touch a gen before they turned 67, you had to take them to it by the hand. But even for such players, Deja Vu didn't remain useful for too long, because after several weeks, even the most hopeless of them eventually learned the basics of the gen RNG, which eliminated the need for Deja Vu. Actually, come to think of it, several weeks might be an overestimate, because originally DBD had only 14 maps, which if you really tried, you could learn by heart within days. The second problem was that Deja Vu didn't always show you 2 gens like it was supposed to. Sometimes, for some strange reason, it was just 1. I'm not sure if it was due to a bug, or maybe there was something about the old Deja Vu that I didn't understand. Like, I don't know, I'm just theorizing here. It could have a hidden range parameter, and if a gen spawned outside of this range, then it wouldn't get highlighted. But in any case, it was a thing. While we were testing this perk, I ran into it like 6 or 7 times in 3 different versions of the game. 1 gen again. That's like the 5th time that this happens. Like, it can't be just me. Like, it's pretty consistent. And naturally, such inconsistency made this perk even less appealing. The only saving grace of the old Deja Vu was its secondary effect, which created a synergy with maps. The way maps work by default is they start with a limited number of objects they can track. To add more objects to them, you need to come within 8 meters of them. What Deja Vu did was automatically add the gens it highlighted to the map's list of trackable objects. So if you absolutely hated the 8-second limit and wanted to be able to see the Deja Vu gens at any time, a map could help you do that. Or should I say, could have helped if the game code wasn't made of dog poo-poo and actually allowed that. The problem was that in the release version of the game, if you brought Deja Vu with a map, they would simply cancel each other out. Somehow, maps, well, the map I guess, because at that time the game had only the green map, completely blocked Deja Vu's aura reading. And Deja Vu didn't let the map show the 1 gen it was supposed to show at the start of the match, only those that you found manually. Oh yeah, well, f me, I guess. I get neither Deja Vu nor map. Sounds omega stupid, I know, but in the devs' defense, I gotta say that they identified and fixed this problem pretty quickly, like 4 or 5 months into the game's lifespan. Yes, by the old DBD standards, that was actually fast. But it wouldn't be DBD devs if soon after that they didn't find another way to break Deja Vu. My throat is actually gonna kill me. I think you could already tell by my voice that I'm pretty sick at the moment. I've actually been sick for the past several weeks, and initially I wanted to wait it out a little until my voice sounds better, but it seems to be dragging on for ages and nothing is changing. So yeah, I guess for this video you're gonna have to bear with my voice being like this, and I'm just gonna hope that it's not gonna get too distracting. Funny thing is that my doctor actually told me that we could speed up my recovery if we... I don't know how to say that, guys. Alright, here it comes. Finally hit 30k on this channel. I don't know if that's to be trusted, but hey, might as well try. Anyway, back to the video. So the devs broke Deja Vu again, but this time it was much worse. Somewhere around the Doctor/Huntress release, they accidentally messed up their spaghetti code in such a unique way that they caused Deja Vu to start activating not after the match intro sequence like it used to, but actually right when the sequence started playing. And since during this sequence you can't control the camera, whether or not the highlighted gens would come into view totally depends on where and how you spawned. An open spot with the camera facing the center of the map allowed you to benefit from more or less the full duration of the perk. But if you spawn somewhere in a corner facing the edge of the map, well, check this out. Oh, this one has potential. Oh, this one has some potential. Right. Very useful. As you could see in this clip, the game not only completely robbed me of the perk value during the camera panning, but also because the panning lasts about as long as the perk effect, I didn't have any time to check the location of the gens after it finished. I mean, I might as well have left the 4th perk slot empty. The result would be the same. Yes, you could still make up for it by bringing a map, but to be honest, it only further showed how bad the Deja Vu situation was. Because imagine having to bring an item, even a cheap one, just to make a mediocre perk somewhat functional.
Old Deja Vu.
All this eventually earned Deja Vu the status of the ultimate clown perk. Everyone from regular players to content creators were trying to attract the devs' attention to that, but alas, they simply refused to change this perk in any way, until a good opportunity for this arose. As time was passing by, the devs kept buffing the killer's base kit gen defense. It started with them not being able to kick gens at all, so they couldn't regress them in any way, shape or form. Then the devs allowed damaging but capped the regression by 25% of the gen's current progress, and only with the Freddy release did they finally remove this limitation and made it possible to regress gens all the way back to 0%. This led to the birth of the aforementioned 3-gen strat. That's when the killer finds a spot on the map where 3 gens spawn super close to each other and starts defending them as if they were their babies. At the same time, they're supposed to keep gradually wearing the survivors down until the point where the damage to them becomes irreversible and they can't come back from it anymore. A lot of survivors viewed this strat as problematic, and rightfully so, because if the killer got too persistent with it, it turned even the most fun and fast-paced match into an absolutely idiotic 30-minute long standoff. And that was exactly what inspired the devs to rework Deja Vu and give it a second life in patch 2.1.0. As you've probably guessed, this patch was when Deja Vu started applying its aura reading to the 3 closest gens, but it doesn't mean that it was identical to its contemporary version. The difference was that its effect wasn't permanent, but rather limited to only 60 seconds, after which it deactivated until someone, including you, fixed a gen. This made it reactivate and show the next worst 3 gen for another 60 seconds, and so on until you eventually ran out of gens. This was a massive improvement over the original iteration, and a perfect counter to the 3 gen strat. And with how much survivors hate being 3 gen, you might think that this was when this perk finally took off. But it couldn't be further from the truth. There may have been some interest at first, just because people are always curious to try whatever's new, but eventually it died, and by 2021, less than 0.5% of survivors were using it in their builds. Why? Don't ask me, I got no idea. Like, prior to this rework, survivors had been absolutely fuming about getting 3-gen'd, but when the devs finally heard them and gave them something that directly countered it, all of a sudden nobody gave a flying f about it. I don't know, maybe people didn't read the description right and thought that the 60 seconds on the first 3-gen was all you got, but in any case, the fate of this rework was decided pretty quickly, and the new version of Deja Vu was forgotten just like its predecessor. It stayed this way for about 4 years, and honestly, I understand why Behavior hesitated to introduce any further changes to it for so long. It was already good enough, and if for some reason survivors wanted to continue boycotting it, fine. I guess 3-genning wasn't that big of an issue after all, but of course it was. In fact, by the time Deja Vu was reworked, it had become even worse. The thing is, a year before that, in an attempt to slow down gen rushing, Behavior increased the time it took to repair one generator from 70 seconds to 80, which made it possible to hold 3-gen setups for longer. 4 years later, in the summer of 2022, this time was further increased to 90 seconds, and that's when 3-genning started to become a real pain in the ass. Luckily, the devs saw it coming, so in the same patch to make sure survivors weren't completely dominated by aggressive gen defenders, they gave them a small compensation for the increased gen repair time. As you've probably guessed, this compensation came in the form of another Deja Vu buff, which now, on top of everything mentioned above, also increased the repair speed on the highlighted generators by 5%. And I can't believe I'm about to say it, but even this didn't make survivors like this perk more. I mean, yeah, I know that we survivor mains can be really stubborn sometimes, but this much? Man, If that's not self-sabotage, then I don't know what is. If I had to rationalize why this Deja Vu buff failed to attract survivors' attention, I'd say it was because the repair speed bonus it provided was extremely inconsistent. You see, since it applied to the highlighted gens, it meant that it was strictly tied to the perk's timer, and once it ran out, your repair speed turned to its default value. Now, think about it in the context of games where not a single gen gets done. In that case, the initial 60 seconds of boosted repair speed was all you got. Doesn't sound too exciting, does it? Or what if on the contrary several gens get done at the same time? No, it would make the timer from each gen sum up. Instead, it would reset several times back to back and you would only get to benefit from the last 60 seconds. Sure, you could argue that if your team was that efficient on gens, you didn't really need any extra repair speed anyway, but first, that's not entirely true, because it could very well be that the gens that got fixed were spread apart anyway, but the ones that could actually use the 5% repair boost were left untouched. And second, I don't care, it's my perk and all its value should also be mine, even if it's redundant. Otherwise, I might as well just bring something else instead. Which was exactly what the prevailing majority of survivors chose to do. And here's one more thing. Even if you got lucky enough to squeeze the full 5 minutes out of Deja Vu, you still wouldn't be able to turn all this time into the actual gen repair time. Because the game simply wasn't designed to let you stay on the gens every single second the perk was active. For example, at the start of the match, you had no choice but to waste up to 30 seconds of the initial timer just getting to the first gen highlighted by Deja Vu. Once you started working on it, there was always the risk of getting interrupted by the killer, which could cut off the remaining 30 seconds. While the killer kept you busy, another survivor could finish a gen and reset the timer, meaning another 60 seconds wasted. Because unless you lost the killer quickly or they changed their mind and left you, by the time the chase was over, the perk would most likely be on cooldown again. The same thing could happen while you were on the hook, helping your teammates, or doing pretty much anything other than sitting on a gen. In other words, expecting Deja Vu to give you more than 2 minutes of increased repair speed in a real match? Dude, are you 5? Anyway, by the spring of 2023, the situation with 3genning had reached a critical point. The reason for this was that in patch 6.6.0, the infamous Skull Merchant joined the game. Who in her release form was obnoxiously perfect for holding 3gen spots. There were a whole bunch of factors that contributed to that. But guys, I don't think I'm morally ready to go down this rabbit hole right now. Let's leave it for a dedicated Skull Merchant video. Right now, to give you some context, let's go over the most important stuff. Originally, when the Skull Merchant placed her drones, instead of instantly going to the scanning mode, they first created a static circular zone around them. If a survivor stayed within it for 10 seconds, they became exposed and had their position revealed to the Skull Merchant via the killer instinct. They remained exposed permanently until they left the zone, plus 60 more seconds after that. And if the Skull Merchant herself entered the zone, she became undetectable. This meant that if you found a drone near a gen you wanted to repair, you had no choice but to disable it, because otherwise you were pretty much just asking to get yeeted away from the gen like a noob, or at the very least get insta-down without a chance of putting up a fight. But the problem was that by doing the drones, you were doing exactly what the Skull Merchant wanted you to do, namely staying away from the gens, which, mind you, she had been relentlessly patrolling all this time. Once you actually got rid of the drone, it became even worse, because it gave you a claw trap, which was continuously broadcasting your position to the Skull Merchant's radar, making it even easier for her to chase you away from the gens. On top of it, it also took away your ability to disable drones, which basically created a vicious circle, because once the Skull Merchant reset a disabled drone, in order to disable it again, you first had to wait out the trap timer and remove the trap. But after disabling the drone for the second time, you would get another trap, which defeated the purpose of getting rid of the previous one. But on the other hand, without doing it, you were back to square one, sitting on a gen while being permanently exposed against a no-terror radius Skull Merchant. In other words, unless you were a part of an exceedingly coordinated team on comms, your only hope to survive this was if at some point the Skull Merchant willingly decided to leave the 3gen area and commit to a chase. If she didn't, you could officially consider yourself fucked, because she would just keep cruising between the gens and resetting the drones like a broken AI for ages. Well, for 1 hour to be exact. Because after 1 hour, the server script automatically terminates the game session and disconnects everyone from the lobby. Sounds like a fever dream, am I right? But no, that was very much the reality of DBD just about 2 years ago. And like that wasn't enough, it was almost like the devs were encouraging this kind of playstyle by constantly adding more 3gen spots to the new and already existing maps. By far the worst of them was the one that appeared on Haddonfield after after its 2022 rework. It was formed by the two gens standing at the end of the street and the one in the house nearby. They used to spawn so close together that as the killer you barely had to put any effort to protect them. All you had to do was stand in the middle of the 3-gen, and when you saw or heard a survivor approaching one of the gens, you just took a few steps toward it, which was enough to scare them off. By the spring of 2023, the 3-gen madness was showing no signs of slowing down. It was literally devouring the game, and to prevent everything from falling apart, the devs urgently had to come up with a solution. Given that Deja Vu was still the only perk that provided a direct counter to 3-genning, it's not surprising that the solution turned out to be...
Is that what I think it is?
Yet another Deja Vu buff. And boy, this time they really hit the spot. In patch 7.7.0, they completely removed the timer from this perk, making it reveal 3-gen setups constantly until they were broken. It made tracking the 3-gen situation on the map much easier. But honestly, after the previous buff, it was already pretty easy, so that really wasn't the main dish. The main dish was the fact that now Deja Vu's repair speed boost was a permanent effect, because without the timer, the gen auras never went on cooldown, and if you stuck only to the highlighted gens, you were affected by the increased repair speed at all times. In fact, behavior increased the speed from 5% to 6%. Yeah, I know it's not the craziest buff in the history, but combined with resilience, prove thyself, and many other gen-related perks, it actually turned you into a full-on gen rush machine. Unsurprisingly, after this patch, the number of people wanting to use this perk started growing exponentially. Over the span of a year, its use rate went up from 1% to the all-time high 16, making it the 4th most used survivor perk at the moment. And the old behavior would have probably stopped there, because in their attempts to fix issues, they rarely used to go beyond just changing the individual related perks. However, by 2023, their balancing department had developed a more systemic approach. So in order to completely put the curb on the aggressive 3-genning, they started fixing basically everything I've mentioned above. First, they reviewed the gen placement on the most problematic maps including Haddonfield and got rid of the most dense gen clusters. Not to say that after this 3-gen setup stopped spawning at all. Sometimes the RNG still gets a little wacky and puts some of the gens dangerously close to each other, but from my experience it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be. Next it was the Skull Merchant's turn, and just look at this changelog. Surely not all of this is 3-gen related, but quite a lot. Did it stop the Skull Merchant players from committing 3-gen abuse every chance they had? Well, yes, but at the cost of completely butchering her to the point where nobody wants to play her anymore. But I'm not gonna pretend that I care about it all that much. Yeah, I understand that completely cancelling a character just because their power had a couple of game-breaking loopholes isn't exactly right, but I can't help it. At this point, there's just too many characters in the roster for me to mourn the downfall of just one killer I never liked to begin with. Relatively recently, the devs directly nerfed 3-genning by making it so that if the killer damages a gen 8 times, it gets blocked for them and they can't make it regress anymore. This made countering 3-gen campers the easiest it's ever been, without any perks. All you have to do is survive the 8 kicks on one of the gens, and from there the killer will be absolutely helpless. And honestly, with all this in mind, I'm starting to think that Deja Vu being this strong is kind of overkill. There's just no need for it to be such a nuke anymore. I'm not saying we should revert it back to the pre-7.0 state, but what I'd definitely do is limit the gen setups its effect applies to. Say we have 3 generators that are all within 24 meters from each other. This I'm totally fine with, so the perks should work as per usual. However, when they're further away from each other, they're not posing any threat to the survivors, so why would Deja Vu even apply to them? That's especially stupid when during the late game, when there's one gen left to fix, you have 2 gens on one side of the map and one on the other. They're like 100 meters away from each other. Even a hillbilly with the iridescent engravings won't be able to keep the setup from breaking, so there's absolutely no reason why survivors should be able to see the auras of these gens, let alone be able to fix them faster. Personally, as good as Deja Vu is right now, I barely use it in my games. I don't know, I just feel like most of the time countering a 3-gen killer is totally up to me, or my team for that matter. I mean, for real, how hard is it? Just learn the map layouts and stop fixing gens on one side of the map. In most cases, that's all it takes. I felt this way even in the DBD's dark times. Well, maybe minus the old Skull Merchant period, but even more so now when 3-genning has been almost completely killed. And this is great that the game allows it, because when it comes to such crucial aspects of the game, it's much healthier when they're balanced on their own, rather than with some specific perks in mind.